Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Marco Island Historical Society Zoom In virtual talk series. We are so pleased to have you joining us this afternoon and to welcome our speaker, David Head. Let me tell you a little bit about David before we get started, but I do want to give a few minutes, if I can, not even a few minutes, minute or two, to let other folks jump in onto the webinar. So if you'll be patient with me, we'll get started in just a second. Yep, we still have some people joining in. Okay. Yeah, got a few more folks joining us, so thank you. Thanks for coming on board. All right, let me introduce myself. My name is Pat Rutledge, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Marco Island Historical Society. And we are partners with Collier Community, Collier, oh, we've got visitors, sorry. We're partners with Collier County in the operation of the Marco Island Historical Museum. And our mission is to preserve and share the history and heritage of Marco Island. So we do that in a number of ways, one of them being through these virtual talks that open up the doors to history beyond just Marco Island, also broader to the state of Florida, because Florida has so many fantastic stories to tell. So with that said, we're going to start. And as I said, our speaker this afternoon is David Head. Tell you a little bit about David. He is an associate lecturer of history at the University of Central Florida. He's published 5 books, including A Crisis of Peace, George Washington, The Newburgh Conspiracy, and The Fate of the American Revolution, which was a finalist for the 2020 George Washington Book Prize. Today's talk is drawn from his most recent book, A Republic of Scoundrels: The Schemers, Intriguers, and Adventurers Who Created a New American Nation. So our topic today, Brother Scoundrels of Early Florida, the West Florida Rebellion of 1804, which will tell the tale of an early time in the United States, which, though a time of statesmen, but was also a time of scoundrels. And we will explore a colorful story of the Kemper brothers, who turned a personal business grievance into a bid for independence in early 19th century Spanish West Florida. So please welcome David Head.
Well, thank you, Pat, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today on this afternoon. It's great to be here and to be talking Florida history with everyone. So here's our topic. As was mentioned, Brother Scoundrels of Early Florida, the West Florida Rebellion of 1804. I'm going to venture a guess that this may not be familiar, or perhaps there are some fans of early Florida rebellions who may know the story already. But my goal is to uncover this early part of our state's history to give us some sense of what Florida was like before 1971, which is when my part of Florida, Central Florida, started to grow very quickly. My plan for today. This is an overview of what I would like to cover. First, I want to talk about the term scoundrels. What does it mean to be a scoundrel in early America? I'm sure that term brings up some images to mind. We'll talk a little bit about what image was supposed to be brought forward by that term scoundrel in the early United States. There were a lot of scoundrels in early America, and I want to take a chance to try and explain why the United States in its early history was populated with so many men who did things that were beyond the pale, beyond the scope of what was considered acceptable in the early 19th century. Then we'll turn to our Florida scoundrels properly. I'll talk about 3 brothers, Reuben, Nathan, and Samuel Kemper. They were businessmen in the borderlands of Florida, on the border between Spanish Florida and the United States. And they really used that border to their advantage. They moved across it easily because there's no barrier, no wall, nothing to stop them from moving from one side to the other. But they're able to take advantage of different systems in Florida, Spanish Florida, versus in the United States. I'll talk about how they got bent on revenge for a slight, a wrong that they felt was committed against them, how they built that revenge into a rebellion against Spanish rule, and how that fell apart, but led to retribution on the behalf of the Spanish. Okay? So a lot of R's there, and a lot of back and forth in some violent actions. Then I'll finally talk about the aftermath. What happened to the Kempers after this episode where they tried to stage a rebellion in Florida. That's the plan for today. So first of all, let's take a quick look at what it means to be a scoundrel in early America. One good place to start is with the dictionaries of the time. One of the earliest dictionaries, English dictionaries, was compiled by the writer Samuel Johnson, so Dr. Johnson. And this is his Dictionary of the English Language. It was first published in 1755, and then there were different editions that were published after that. If you like to play around with words and you're fond of what words mean and how the meaning changes over time, my university, University of Central Florida, has a project where they are digitizing the early dictionary of Samuel Johnson. So you can search for UCF Dr. Johnson's dictionary, and you'll take the webpage and you can look up to your heart's content the mid-18th century meaning of English words. Well, that's what I did, and I found that the word scoundrel in the mid-18th century meant a mean rascal, a low, petty villain. Clear enough, right? Okay. Well, in this sense, mean, well, means someone of low status, right? Not a high-born person, a person of low status. And a rascal, right? You might like to be called a rascal. That has a kind of playful meaning to it, right? That old rascal, right? But in this sense, a rascal is someone who's contemptible, who is not honest, who's dishonest, perhaps violent. That's what a rascal is. Someone's out to steal from you. Then also a low, petty villain. A low and petty, also words that have an association with a low social status. Okay, so all those meanings all in there together. I think that Noah Webster, the early American maker of dictionaries, he got a little bit closer, perhaps not surprisingly, to what the American understanding of scoundrel was in the early 19th century. So his first dictionary, an American dictionary of the English language, came out in 1828. So 20 some years after the period that I'm talking about, but it does a good job of expressing what the word meant in America. You'll see that he also defines scoundrel as a mean, worthless fellow, a rascal, a low, petty villain. Where did he get that from? I would like to look up Webster's definition of plagiarism just to see what he thought that was acceptable at the time. Okay, so he's basically lifting Dr. Johnson's understanding, but he adds something that's important for the American context: a man without honor or virtue. And that's really what I want to kind of hone in here, because that is the American sense of what a scoundrel is: someone who does not have honor or virtue. Now, there are many ways to be honorable and many ways to be virtuous, but what Americans have in mind and what Webster is capturing there is a way of violating the ideal of virtue as self-sacrifice. This idea that public virtue is what they really mean by virtuous. And a virtuous person in this sense is someone who is willing to sacrifice his own interests for the good of the public. And that was really the sense of how the United States was going to survive as a country. That was the vision of the founders, that without the traditions of Europe, all the trappings of monarchy, the way that the United States would survive was if its people were virtuous, in the sense of sacrificing themselves and their own self-interest, not seeking their own advantage all the time, but putting the whole, the group, the country ahead of their own private gain. Now, right, if you know anything about people, you know that that is a noble sentiment, a noble ideal, but that's not the way people are. And that's certainly not the way people were naturally in the early republic either. The political leaders were self-interested. There was always a tension, though, between how people wanted to behave, right, and how they knew they had to behave if they wanted to be able to gain power and to keep power. So the way politics worked in the early republic is that you couldn't be seen seeking office too aggressively. You had to always pretend that you didn't want office, that you didn't want to be elected to a position of power, that you only did it because your friends had imposed on you, and you told them no for the longest time, but they kept coming back and back and saying, you are the only one who can lead us. You are the only one who is wise enough to be our leader. You're the only one who can be trusted with power. And then you had to pretend like you reluctantly, it only, at the greatest kind of humility would accept the encouragement of your friends to seek a public office. That was the game that politicians played in the early republic. Well, scoundrels, they don't play that game. They don't feel that it's necessary to make a pretense of sacrificing for the public. They are out for themselves. They will use public offices to advance themselves when it's convenient. They will turn away from public offices when that's convenient for themselves. Some great examples of scoundrels are people who would corrupt the public office, use it for their own private gain. A great example of this is Aaron Burr. Okay. Aaron Burr, one of the early vice presidents, most famous for shooting Alexander Hamilton, but he has also had a reputation as someone who would put himself first. That's one of the things that had scared Hamilton about supporting Burr during the election of 1800, when Burr and Jefferson tied in the number of electoral college votes they got. Even though Hamilton had his problems with Jefferson, he believed that Jefferson was honest, that he came to his policy positions forthrightly, right? Not to help himself only. Well, Aaron Burr is one of the examples. Other examples, there's a wonderful example, the Tennessee politician, William Blount. He became an early territorial governor, and he would be the first senator to represent Tennessee. He was also a voracious land speculator who would cheat Revolutionary War veterans who had earned land in Tennessee, what would become Tennessee, as their bounty for fighting the war. Blount used his position to defraud and cheat Native Americans out of their land through corrupt treaty agreements, okay? All to amass land in his own hands, so using his position for his own advancement. Another kind of type of scoundrel would often usurp U.S. sovereignty on the borders. So the United States federal government is supposed to set the policy on the borders, control the borders, and negotiate with foreign governments. Some people, as we'll see in the case of the Kempers, would just make it up themselves. They're the ones who are out on the border, and they'll try to make sure that foreign policy is conducted in such a way that it serves their interests, regardless of whether that entangles the United States in any foreign wars or foreign problems. You see, George is keeping an eye on you. Any scoundrels out there? Does he see any across the internet? Okay. Keep an eye out for any if you come across them. Why was early America open to scoundrels? Okay. It's not simply the case that people failed the ideals of the American Revolution. Okay. That's not what happened. It's that the American Revolution opened avenues for scoundrels in a way that hadn't been anticipated. It is the American Revolution and the way it delivers freedom for so many that not only opens up freedom for people to act virtuously, which was the goal of the founders, but the American Revolution also opens up freedom for men to do whatever they want, right? The rise of democracy is another advancement, right? You love democracy? Well, when people can make the choice for themselves, some of those people are always going to choose badly, to choose themselves above the interests of others. Okay. So independence brings the freedom to men to choose to govern themselves virtuously without the corruption of monarchy. That was the concern of the founders. But Americans, when they get the choice, they have their own goals. Okay. Some of them, what's this living virtuously stuff? I fought against the British to advance myself. That's why I was doing it. The American Revolution also creates a new geography for the United States. The United States will take over the land from the British, so the British cede their territory to the new United States. Well, that then puts the United States not bordering land controlled by Britain, but they're bordering land controlled by the French and then the Spanish. Okay, actually, it's first the Spanish and then the French and then back to the Spanish. Okay? So U.S. borders are determined by European politics, European warfare. Okay? So when the war ends, this is all Spanish territory. Okay? Then Napoleon forces Spain to give it to France because he has a plan to support a reconquest of Haiti. It doesn't work. So then Napoleon is willing to deal, and he sells his territory, Louisiana territory here, to the United States, and the United States takes over in 1803. So then that'll become part of the United States here in that territory. We need to have a, let me do geography first. We'll call an audible here. Since we got into geography, let's talk about geography before we get to the Kemper brothers themselves. An exception, if you go back to this map, an exception here, okay, is over here. Let's do it over here. So you see the way that Florida extends westward to the Mississippi River. That is the Spanish colony of West Florida. Okay? So West Florida and East Florida. These had been so Spain had owned the Floridas in the 18th century. Then Spain loses Florida to England during the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. And then Spain gets the Floridas back from England at the end of the American Revolution. Okay, did you follow that? So Spanish to English, English to Spanish after the end of these various wars. When the English took over the Florida territory in 1763, they divided it into two colonies, so East Florida and West Florida. That was done by the British. The capital of East Florida is at St. Augustine. Okay, so up here, St. Augustine. So I'm up here in Orlando, East Florida. You were down here in Marco Island, also East Florida. So we would have been part of the same colony back in the day. The other colony of West Florida, the dividing line is at the Apalachicola River, okay? And it stretches not only through the panhandle of today's state, but also into the bottom parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and into Louisiana. So it goes much further than today's state of Florida, across the bottom of these other states. So those were also part of Florida at one point. Let me get to the Kempers then. Let me go back here. Okay, so that's where the main action is going to take place, is in West Florida, in this region that is part of Spain's territory, but right next to U.S. territory. The main characters of our story, the Kemper brothers, Reuben, Nathan, and Samuel. They had been born in Virginia, and their parents had moved them when they were boys to Ohio. Out to Ohio. There's a large migration out to Ohio after the American Revolution. And they grew up there in Ohio. I believe their father was a minister or a preacher. And they had, when they were teenagers in their late teens, early 20s, they entered into a business arrangement with one of their neighbors in Ohio. And the business involved traveling down the rivers to West Florida with luxury goods that the kind of wild frontiersmen of the time might want to purchase. So they take their wares on a flatboat down to West Florida, and they open a shop there, store. Right? They're going to buy and sell. They're going to buy like hides and things like that, and then sell luxury goods to the trappers and the hunters in West Florida. They arrive in 1799. And part of the business arrangement is that the brothers will get to live on the business partner's property in the Feliciana parish of West Florida. Okay, so this is the Feliciana parish. It's easy to type. It's surprisingly hard to pronounce, as I'm finding right now. So in this district here, that's where the business is operated. The brothers also will, they also buy property over in the United States, over across the border in Mississippi, in a place called Pinckneyville. So here is where things are happening on a modern map here. So it looks, everything's there. That's the larger context. If you zoom in, you'll see this is Bayou Sara, where the store is located, and this is over in Pinckneyville. So an American settlement, a town in Mississippi, right across the border from where the business is in Spanish West Florida, Feliciana. All right, keeping everything together. The brothers lived there for 4 or 5 years, and they tried to operate their business, but it did not go well. Their business was not successful. And as their business is failing, they have a falling out with their partner, right, who's based in Ohio. He's kind of an absentee landlord, absentee partner there. And as the business is failing, they run up a lot of debts. The partner eventually takes Reuben, the oldest of the 3 brothers, to court, to Spanish court. Okay? Takes him to court in the Spanish court system, trying to compel Reuben and his brothers to leave the partner's property on Bayou Sara. Also, Reuben is sued for outstanding business debts. Well, Reuben has a bright idea. He knows that the United States would like to have the Floridas. Okay? That is a foreign policy priority for the United States. If we go back to our other map here, we can see here, right? It borders the United States. The other territory has been, right? This is U.S. territory out here. We have this territory in here and here. This is the piece that's missing from the United States. So that is territory that, you know, it's no secret that the United States would like to add that to the country for the security. So you have that, all that land contiguous part of the United States, and also for trade opportunities through the various rivers that will run through West Florida. Okay? So Reuben knows the United States would like this. Reuben makes a gamble. He figures that he can delay the case and delay the case and delay the case more until finally he figures it's only a matter of time before the United States takes over that territory, when the jurisdiction of the Spanish court will no longer be in play. And then he thinks he can get a more favorable outcome from the court, from a lawsuit, in a U.S. court once the United States takes over that territory. Or they'll have to start the whole thing over again, and then, you know, his former partner can just wait and just ignore him for that time. So Reuben refuses to respond to the Spanish court. Well, Reuben may have had the long-term vision correct, but that part of Florida would not become part of the United States for many years later. And in the meantime, the Spanish court issues a default judgment. So if you don't show up, if you're sued and you don't show up, well, you can't just stretch it out indefinitely. Then the court will issue a judgment against you. You didn't even come to defend yourself. Well, the plaintiff gets everything he wants. And so there is a default judgment against Reuben. Well, in order to enforce that judgment, more time goes on. And then finally, the Spanish officials, they call out the militia to enforce the court's order and vindicate the Spanish legal system. The militia comes out and tries to evict the Kempers from their lodgings there. Interestingly, the Spanish militia, I say it's the Spanish militia because it is ordered out under the jurisdiction of the Spanish government, but they are not, the members, the individual men, are not all Spanish background. Many Americans have settled in this territory in West Florida. Some Englishmen have settled. Some men who are Irish by birth have settled there. So it's kind of a conglomeration of many different nationalities have all settled in this region. There are many people living there who are happy with Spanish rule. They're happy with this way Spanish are running things. So an Englishman, some Englishmen, some Irishmen, some Americans, they all join, they're all part of the militia, and they turn out to get to enforce the court's order. Kempers were probably figuring, well, we're all Americans. Americans aren't going to try to cause trouble for other Americans. Well, he miscalculated in that, because they show up and they try to evict the Kempers. The militia that showed up, they were instructed not to escalate things to violence. So they're going to show up in force with their guns, you know, read the court's orders, look intimidating, but not start shooting. The Spanish government did not want this to escalate to bloodshed. The Kempers, however, the Kempers would not budge, but eventually they decided to escape at night and flee up to Pinckneyville. And so they escaped out of there and went up to Pinckneyville. Well, they're just regrouping because later in the year, they return from Pinckneyville, reoccupy their house on Bayou Sarah, and say, come on, just come and get us. Now we're dug in. You have an order. Come and make us leave. So this is not their house. Yeah, one of the issues is that the Kempers are they're obscure, so you don't have a lot of artwork to share about their locations. So this is the closest I could get to a little house on the Bayou Sarah there. It looks peaceful. I could sit there, right, fish periodically. Wouldn't be such a bad vacation if you want to get away from the world. So the militia is again called out. They again have a confrontation. And the Kempers, they just sit on their porch, cleaning their guns, sharpening their knives, saying, if you come to force us out, it could cost one of you your life. The militia doesn't want to get killed over this stuff, right? It's just enforcing a court order. Right? You're not going to risk our lives for this. The Kempers then escalate things as the militia captain is trying to negotiate a peaceful end to the situation. The Kempers say that if you don't let us stay here, we're going to raid neighboring plantations with these well-cleaned guns and these sharpened knives that we have here. We're going to incite a slave rebellion if you don't let us alone. And that, of course, is one of the things that local planters fear the most. Excuse me, is the possibility that their large enslaved populations could turn against them. Okay? And then that could be a huge conflagration in the area. So that's the Kempers know which button to push to cause the maximum pain here. The Kempers, there's a standoff here. Then they take things up a notch. They go further. They are angry that the Spanish officials and the militia who collaborated with the Spanish authorities. They want to, send the message. It's not just threats. So they go around and they burn the houses of Spanish officials and the neighbors who have collaborated against them. They do that, and then they return to Pinckneyville. So again, escape across the border where the Spanish militia cannot follow. The Kempers are not finished. They still want that territory in West Florida. In August, so a couple months later, they return to Feliciana. And this time, they have come not simply to intimidate or to threaten, but to take over the parish there, the Feliciana district. They come marching again with about 30 or 40 followers, men that they have rounded up in Pinckneyville. And they come in as a liberating force. They declare independence of the district. They have a flag. This is an artist rendering of the flag. And they march in there and say, join our banner. We are here to liberate you. Okay? Then, once they show up in Feliciana, they make their goal to march on Baton Rouge, the local place of governance in that part of West Florida. So the capital of Louisiana today. So they're going to march on Baton Rouge. And their goal now is not simply to get revenge against individual Spanish officials, not to get revenge against individual neighbors who are collaborating with the enemy. Now they are bent on attacking Spanish authority itself, not just those officials that were mean to them. The Kempers and their couple dozen followers, they want to overthrow Spanish authority in the region and declare their own country. So they've gone from not wanting to leave their home and pay their debts to fomenting a rebellion and declaring independence of their own region. They have a lot of chutzpah here, right? A lot of boldness. They're brazen about what they want to do. Well, the followers of the Kempers, they are defeated by the Spanish garrison. So Baton Rouge is well defended. There are professional soldiers there, so not just the militia. And when there's eventually an armed conflict, the Spanish come out on top. And the Kempers, again, are driven back to Pinckneyville. You can notice they're going back and forth all the time, trying to attack in Spanish territory and going back to where they are back in Pinckneyville, over in Mississippi, across the border in U.S. territory. You would think that was enough. Okay, the Spanish have finally pushed them away, but now it's the Spanish who are not done with the Kempers. The Spanish can't let it go. And the Spanish authorities make a plan to get some payback. Fomenting a rebellion. This is sedition. This is an act of treason. And the Spanish authorities don't want to just let this go. I assume part of it is that their pride is hurt. Okay, so that's certainly part of it. But also, they would like to send a message to any other Americans who might want to cross the border and try and take over Spanish territory in Florida. So the Spanish authorities in West Florida, they organize a kind of covert operation. You can just imagine how this went down. A Spanish gang, group of Spanish, under the orders from the governor, they cross into U.S. territory. So outside Spanish territory into U.S. territory. They find where the Kempers are living. I assume they had done some reconnaissance and some intelligence work before this to know where they are. So they go to where the Kempers are living. Reuben and Nathan were that night at one house, and these men, they just rush into the house like a home invasion kind of thing, kick in the door, and they grab Reuben and Nathan and drag them out, arrest them. Again, arresting them on U.S. soil, trying to pull them back into Spanish territory. They find Samuels at another house with his family. And then again, they burst in the door. They threaten Samuel's wife, grab up her husband, and arrest him and carry him out. And put them all on a boat going back to Baton Rouge. So just imagine this. It's at night there, it's dark, they're out in the wilds there. And whatever you're doing, relaxing, whatever, by the fire, and just a group of armed men kick in your door and start arrest you, grab you. You don't know for sure that they're Spanish. They could be some other enemy that you might have, okay? Or thieves or bandits or whoever just taking you off. Okay? So what happens is they are floating on the river here, going back to Baton Rouge. So they're up here in Mississippi. They need to get on the river down to Baton Rouge. The problem, of course, is the river is twisting and turning, and there's some parts where it's close to U.S. territory, right? It's all along the border here. Other parts where it is West Florida. Okay? So in one of these areas, one of these flat areas here, where they are next to U.S. territory in Louisiana. Okay? So West Florida's up here, Louisiana's down here, Spain up here, U.S. down here. The Kempers are able to alert U.S. authorities while they've kind of crossed over close to the U.S. side of the riverbank here. By alert U.S. authorities, you can guess what they do? They start yelling and making commotion. And someone is there, a farmer or somebody's there and sees this, and they Kempers are raising the alarm. We've been kidnapped, right? We've been kidnapped. Come, go help us. So whoever hears them shouting from their boat goes and tells the U.S. authorities. The U.S. turn out. And they are able to stop the boat. The U.S. Military there takes everybody into custody. The Spanish are like, we have lawful orders to arrest these men. They're wanted criminals in West Florida. Kempers are, of course, saying these are kidnappers who have violently taken us. We're the victims here. And the United States just arrests everybody. Just put everybody in jail and sort out the politics of it later. Eventually, the Spanish group, so the guys who crossed into U.S. territory, they are let go, and they return to Spanish West Florida. The Kempers are eventually freed. The United States, there's a court hearing, and the governor of U.S. Louisiana, William Claiborne, he weighs in on this too. They do not like the Kempers at all. Okay, they don't like the Kempers. They don't like that they've been crossing over the border, stirring up trouble with the Spanish. The Kempers are also notorious for their underhanded ways, right? They're violent people. Just Claiborne especially would just rather not have them in his territory at all. But they are American citizens, and they were residing in the United States. And the United States cannot have a Spanish covert operation on U.S. soil to arrest American citizens. You just can't let that happen, regardless of who the actual individual Americans are. So that's why the United States supports freeing the Kempers and getting them back secure in the United States. The Kempers, true to their violent nature, they're walking out of court free. Okay, free men. You think they would be perhaps chastened by the experience, that they may have second thoughts, they may want to keep a low profile, stay out of the eyes of any authorities, just go live quietly, but they don't. They happen to spot the militia captain also walking out of court. They should have planned the logistics of this better, the court officials should have. But they find the Spanish militia captain. It's not like there he is, that's the guy. And then they beat him severely. So the Spanish militia captain is beaten severely, violently, before he's able to get out of court, well, as he's leaving court that day. Okay, so now just chaos outside of court. You can imagine that scene. Finally, the aftermath of this situation. The aftermath for the Kemper brothers, and then I do want to say briefly, I didn't write it here, but briefly what the aftermath for the United States is. Reuben, Samuel, and Nathan, they give up on Spanish West Florida. Reuben will fight at the Battle of New Orleans against the British, so that major battle to end the War of 1812. Okay, it's not entirely clear what he did on the day of battle, but he is in the U.S. military on that side, part of the militia. Okay? So he's down there somewhere, right, in the painting, doing something. He became further entangled in various lawsuits and land claims, and that seems to be a constant part of his life afterwards, is just fighting lawsuits, land speculation, one get rich quick scheme after another. The brother Samuel traveled to Alexandria, Louisiana, where he ran a tavern. And that seems like it might have been a quiet life, but no, he got involved in another military action, a filibuster operation led by these two men, Gutierrez and McGee. The filibuster operation was organized in Louisiana and would go over into, let me get back here, a map here, went back over into, right, what was Spanish Texas here later on, Spanish Texas, or over here. So a filibuster operation, so filibuster today is a name we use for a delaying tactic in a legislature. It gets that meaning in the 1850s. Before the 1850s, a filibuster was an armed private military adventure. So not an official governmental operation, but men who gathered together on their own authority and attacked a foreign place. This happened a fair bit along the Louisiana-Texas border between the United States and Spain. It happened a fair number of times in the 18-teens, 1820s. And then there's more filibustering in the 1850s. It became the transfer, how the word meaning shifted over time, was that during the debates that preceded the Civil War, one side or the other, when they're having their arguments in the Senate, and I can't remember if it's the North branding Southerners like this or Southerners branding Northerners like this, but one side or the other would brand their opponent as filibusters for defending slavery, kind of like an insult. I mean, you are no better than those military adventurers, those guys. Okay? So that's where we get the name filibuster as a delaying tactic in the Senate from. Is supposed to be an insult, likening an opponent to these lawless military adventures from an earlier era. Nathan Kemper, the youngest of the three brothers, he moved to St. Mary's Parish on the Gulf Coast, who stays in Louisiana. Okay, so all three have stayed in Louisiana mostly. They don't go back in West Florida. But as proper to any real scoundrel, he finds an activity even more scoundrel-like than being a rebellious figure leading a rebellion. He becomes a politician, the ultimate scoundrel, as a state legislator in Louisiana. The United States will then acquire this territory piece by piece over the years until they take in 1810, they take part of this territory in West Florida. They take another part in 1811, 1812, and then there's a treaty settled in 1819, ratified in 1821, that then gives the United States Florida, secures out here what the border actually is, gets the Oregon Territory for the United States, while leaving Texas and this territory in the West, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California, and other Arizona, New Mexico, also stays as Spanish. And then there's another war fought over that in the 1840s. Okay, so that's the story of East and West Florida. Okay. That brings me to the end of my presentation today. I was about to say, some part of me wishes we would have kept East and West Florida, but we didn't when Florida became part of the United States in 1821, got rid of that division. So this is a picture of my most recent book, and this is a way to stay in touch with me. I look forward to your questions here. Hopefully we can get a little bit of a Q&A here today. But if something should occur to you after our time together is finished, there are many ways to get in touch with me. You can contact me in any of these ways with any questions that might pop up later today. Thank you again for having me here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
David, it's Pat Rutledge. What a great story. Oh my goodness. I have a whole new appreciation for Scoundrels. This was really, really entertaining and educational. So thank you. If you do have a question and you'd like to put it into the Q&A, that's great. We're also keeping an eye on chat as well. So to get us started, and I do have to say, David has a hard stop at 3, right? But we'll start on a couple of questions anyway, see where we go. So here's one. Why wasn't the U.S. more aggressive in stopping the Kemper brothers?
Yeah, so one question that may come to mind is, well, if the Kemper brothers are always retreating back to Pinckneyville, and the Spanish authorities are complaining to U.S. authorities, why does the United States do more to intervene? And you can see it could potentially entangle the United States in an unhappy and possibly violent encounter with the Spanish over this strip of territory. I think one part of it is to remember how poorly policed that area of the country is. This is out on the frontier where there's just not a lot of U.S. authority out there. It's on the borderlands. And even if the United States wants to, they have to consider all the other priorities that are facing U.S. leaders in Washington. The army at the time is very small. Under Thomas Jefferson especially, Jefferson wants a small army that doesn't cost very much and doesn't require a lot of authority of tax collectors to support it. Okay, so there's an idea of having a small army, and there are just places that are more important than the border with West Florida, and more concerns, like with England or France, than there are concerns with these small group of guys who are stirring up trouble on the borders. So it's a low priority for U.S. officials, and even if they wanted to do something, it would take a big commitment to send the manpower there to do something about it. It's better to rely on the local authorities, meaning local Spanish authorities, to sort them out, unless there is some direct challenge to U.S. sovereignty, like coming across the border to arrest Americans on American soil. That is something that, in principle, the United States cannot let that stand.
Okay. So here's another one. What really motivated the Kemper brothers to actually rebel? Why weren't they satisfied with the skirmishes and things that they had going on? What made them take that step to create their own flag and rebel?
Right. So I don't think they were motivated by a kind of patriotic sentiment that, we're Americans and we should have this land belongs to us. I think it was all tied up in their personal ambitions. Um, Part of it is, revenge is it's one of the most basic human motivations. It's also one of the most destructive ones in all human history, right? But it's really hard to let that go. Once someone has wronged you, they have a kind of idea they just have to get back, have to get revenge for some sort of primal reason. One thing that I think the Kempers really miscalculated on was they thought that because we are Americans under Spanish rule and we are unhappy, therefore other Americans in this region must also be unhappy with Spanish rule. And that just wasn't true. There are any number of Americans, people right, who've grown up in the United States, who had migrated to another country, another colony, and they were perfectly fine with the way their life was there. They were fine with the way Spain administered its laws. They did not want a violent uprising to get them involved in military service and at the very least disrupt everything that they had built. So that's something that for Americans, it doesn't quite jump to mind that it's possible to be happy living in another country next door to yours. But that's how the Americans, some Americans at least who lived there, they were okay. They were against the Kempers stirring up trouble. So the fact that they were from the same country, had the same, same language and ethnic background, perhaps it didn't matter as much as preserving the life that they've built here. They don't want to go on the Kempers vendetta. Just leave us alone, guys. We don't want a part of this rebellion. We're happy if West Florida stays part of Spain.
Thank you. That's a fabulous story. I can't tell you how much I really appreciated it, and I know our participants did as well. I don't see any other questions. So with that, David, would you mind putting up the closing Florida Humanities? Okay. So
yes, thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, to Florida Humanities, these talks are so important, and for organizations like the Marco Island Historical Society, having this as a resource to share Florida's history is really fantastic. You will receive an email from us with a survey link attached. And it's really important to Florida Humanities and to our speakers if you would take a few moments to give us your thoughts on today's presentation. And with that, David Head, I thank you so very much. And we look forward to seeing you again on a future Zoom talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.
Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you.